In this video, I'm going to show you the 3 automated rules I use to scale my Facebook ad campaigns. Plus, I'm going to share some interesting graphs that demonstrate how and why they work. So automated rules use if, and, then statements to look at the campaigns, ad sets, and ads inside of your Facebook ad account, and then apply changes or send notifications whenever certain conditions have been met. And this is all done automatically for you. I use automated rules to adjust the daily budget whenever the cost per result of a campaign or ad set has been dropping or rising. Specifically, I'll create one rule to increase the daily budget by 10% whenever the cost per result is inexpensive or below my break-even point so that I can scale it up and maximize the results I'm getting from it. I'll create a second rule to decrease the daily budget by 10% whenever it starts to get a little bit too expensive. And then I'll create a third rule to deactivate the campaign or ad set altogether when the cost per result has a prolonged period of time where it's been too expensive. So let's take a look at how they're set up. So inside of your ad account, you want to click on the More button and then scroll down and click Create a New Rule. A dialog is going to pop up, and this is where we're going to set our conditions, and if these conditions are met, it's going to apply these rules. So we can give it a name, and we can apply this rule to these active campaigns. You can see right now we can apply this rule to all active campaigns, ad sets, or ads because we don't have any selected, so we can't specify certain ones. So what I'll do is click cancel. You can see there's 4 active campaigns in this account. If we take a look at the cost per result, we can see that they're optimizing for different objectives. They're all conversion campaigns, but these first 3 are optimizing for leads, and this 4th one is optimizing for a custom conversion event, which is appointments. And you can see the cost per results drastically different between these 4 campaigns. So it wouldn't make sense for us to create a scaling rule because these campaigns are so different from each other. So instead, what I'm going to do is select the ones that are using the same marketing objective and optimizing for the same conversion event. And then I'm going to click on More and create a rule that applies to all of the active ad sets inside of just these 3 campaigns. I'm going to name this Scale Up. And you can see now we can apply this to these 3 specific campaigns or all of the active ad sets or ads inside of it. Now they're using ad set budget optimization, meaning the daily budget is being applied to the ad sets inside of the campaigns, as opposed to a campaign budget optimized campaign where the media spend is being allocated to the campaign level. So if you were using a CBO campaign, you would select apply this rule to these 3 campaigns, and then the action step would be increase daily budget by. But because we're using ad set optimization, we're going to select active ad sets inside these campaigns, select the action step as increase daily budget by. I like to scale them by 10%. A lot of people will recommend 20%. Some people will do a lot more than that. I find that this is where I get the best results. It's a little bit conservative, but it's more consistent. The maximum daily budget cap is the maximum daily budget that this rule will scale your ad sets to before it just stops applying this rule. So these particular ad sets are starting at $30 per day, I believe. So I might set the daily cap to like 150. Usually I'm in here every day looking at them anyways, just to keep an eye. But if you'd like to be more conservative, you can set that at a lower number as well. The action frequency is how often this rule is actually going to apply these changes whenever these conditions are met. So if we selected once hourly, as long as these conditions have been met successfully, then the budget's going to increase by 10% every single hour. So that's way too quick. I only like that 10% increase to happen once per day. So I'm going to select once daily, and then we're going to select or configure our conditions. So the cost per result is less than, and then we're going to select a cost per result that's appropriate for our campaign. So for example, let's say you're selling a $1,000 per month service and your average customer retention is 3 months. So your average revenue per customer would be $3,000. And then let's say you have a 75% gross margin, which would be $2,250, and you wanted to spend no more than 50% of that margin on the acquisition costs. That would be $1,125 cost per acquisition. And then let's say you're doing a lead generation campaign instead of a direct sales campaign. And of the leads you generate, you're able to convert 1% of them, which means you can spend no more than $11.25 acquiring each lead. So it's important to know your numbers and do a little bit of math here. In this case, this $11 might be an appropriate cost per lead to set our rule at. I might reduce it another 10% and set it at $10 to balance it out, just knowing that some of the ad sets that we launch will be unsuccessful, will have a higher cost per result, and will ultimately drive up the overall cost per lead across the account. When I click add, you'll notice that it creates another condition by default, and that is lifetime impressions greater than 8,000. So what this is saying right now is that over the lifetime of any active ad sets in these 3 campaigns, as long as the cost per result is below $10 and it has more than 8,000 impressions, then apply this action step, which is increasing the budget. The reason we have 8,000 as a minimum is because if you don't collect enough data, if you don't have enough impressions before you start changing it and scaling the budget, Facebook might not have enough data to do that effectively. So you want it to have enough data before it actually starts making and applying these rules. So I would suggest keeping this as 8,000. Now the time range is the period of time where it looks at these conditions for the active ad sets in this campaign. So what I'm going to do is change this either to 7 days or 14 days. Typically I'll start with 7. So what this means is that over the last 7-day period, what's the average cost per result? Is it less than $10? And does it have 8,000 impressions over that last 7-day period? The reason I do this is because your cost per result will often change and fluctuate from one day to the next. And so your scaling rules can it doesn't really make sense for your scaling rules to be adjusted based on that daily fluctuation. I like to average it out over the last 7 days so it's a bit smoother and it's not making any drastic changes. I'm going to keep the attribution window as the default and select the schedule as daily. You could also do continuously. So what this is this is looking at the conditions. So once per day at 12 a.m. Pacific time, it's going to check and see if these conditions are met. And then the action frequency is how frequently these actions are actually applied. And then you can set the notification settings as well. So by default, you have to get Facebook notifications, but then you can toggle on or off email notifications as well. From here, you just click create and you'd be good to go. The next rule is going to be a scale down rule, which we're going to apply to the active ad sets. And we're going to flip this to decrease daily budget by 10%. The minimum daily budget floor, this is the lowest point at which is going to scale down your daily budget. So I typically like and recommend launching your campaigns or your ad sets with a daily budget that's at or higher than what your expected cost per result is going to be. So if you're expecting to get $10 cost per lead, I'd recommend a daily budget per ad set above $10. Sometimes that's not always the case. If you're doing like an appointment generation campaign, sometimes that can be too expensive if you have a small budget. But let's say in this case, we launched this ad set at $10 per day. What I would set as the minimum daily budget floor is something lower than that. I mean, you could like $5. And I'll show you why when we create our third rule, which is the deactivation rule. Frequency once daily, cost per result is greater than. We chose 10 before, so we can say greater than 10, or we could even do something like 12. So that means that if it's below 10, it'll scale up. If it's more expensive than 12, it'll scale down, but anything in between there, it just stays the same. So that's something that you can choose whether or not you want to do. And here's a little extra step I like to put in here. Again, this is going to relate to that third rule. So I'm going to type in daily. The daily budget is greater than, so if we launched at $10, I'm going to say greater than $9.99. And we need to make sure that the time range matches our scale up rule. So we want this to look over the last 7 days. Keep the same attribution window, schedule at once daily, and then notifications. So the reason we have this rule is because what we're going to do is, or what this means is that it's going to look at the last 7 days for the active ad sets in this campaign. Does it have more than 8,000 impressions? Does it have more than a higher than $12 cost per result? And is the daily budget set at something higher than $9.99? So if that's true, then it's going to decrease the daily budget by 10%. So I would create that rule. And then what I'm going to do is create a kill rule or a deactivation rule, which is going to deactivate the ad set altogether. So in this case, we're going to change this from decrease to turn off ad set when the daily budget is smaller than $10, and then apply. So the difference between the scaling down rule and the deactivation or kill rule is the daily budget. So if the daily budget of the ad set is greater than $10, it's going to just decrease that budget by 10% per day. Or if the daily budget is less than $10, which is what we launched at, then it's just going to deactivate that ad set. So my goal with the scale down rule is to hopefully prolong the life of the ad set. I found through experimentation, when I first started running campaigns, what I would do once an ad set got to a point where the cost per result was too expensive, I would just deactivate it altogether. So at that point, it might have been scaled up to, let's say, $30 per day. And as soon as it got expensive, I would just deactivate it. One hypothesis I had was, is it the budget being scaled too high that is causing that cost per result to increase as well? So rather than deactivating it, I thought I would test decreasing that daily budget. And so that's when I started testing this descale rule. And I found that it prolonged the life of ad sets, typically by like a couple weeks, or in some cases months. So that's the purpose of the descale rule. Now the deactivation or kill rule, once that daily budget has been scaled down to below where it started at, in this case $10 per day, to me that's evidence that it's been given a fair shot and it's been performing poorly for enough consecutive days that it's time to just deactivate it. And as I mentioned before, the daily budget is now below what I would like any ad set to be running at. So that's why I use a scale down and a kill rule. Okay, so this is an example of an ad set that's had these scaling rules applied to it. And the graph on the top here, this is the cumulative amount that's been spent. And then the graph below is the daily amount of budget that's been spent. So you can see when it launched, it had spent about $23 on that day. The next day, $23 again, $23 again, $20 the next day, $20, and then it looks like it starts to apply the scaling rules. It spends $26, so it's starting to scale up, then $31, and then it starts to go back down to $25, and then it starts hitting kind of a groove here, and you can see that the daily budget scales up. We're now at $53, $98, and then a peak here of $153. And then at this point, something happened. The cost per lead started to increase to a point where it was no longer acceptable. So it starts to scale down, and we can see it scales all the way down on October 1st to $56 per day. The cost per lead goes back down, and then the scaling rules kick in, and it looks like it scales back up to a peak of $147, just about where it was at previously. And then it finally dies off and ends in November. So previously what I would have done is at this point on September 19th, or maybe the next day on September 21st here, when it starts to decrease in performance, I might have just deactivated it because I would look at it and say, okay, the cost per result is too expensive. But you can see because of the scaling rules, it allowed this ad set to scale back up and maintain performance for a period of, an extra month and a bit after this point where it first started to decline. Now, if we go and take a look at the leads that were generated during this period, it's pretty interesting. So the top is the total amount of leads generated per day, and then the bottom is the average cost per lead during that period each day as well. So you can see we have these two spikes here. This correlates to when that daily budget was increased. So we're seeing more leads were being generated during that period on those particular days. On this day, there was 8 total leads generated. We can see that up on the top here. So that correlates to the amount of money being spent each day. So that's great. That's what you'd expect. But what's interesting is if you look at the total cost per lead on the graph on the bottom, you have spikes up and down, but generally speaking, the cost per lead remains fairly flat. Right, so we see this pretty noticeable spike here. That's on September 21st. That's when it started to descale. But you can see, generally speaking, the cost per lead has remained somewhat consistent across its entire lifetime. So that's kind of the goal of applying scaling rules. This is what we want to see, is a pretty flat cost per lead over the lifetime. And during that period, we're finding moments where we can actually maximize and extract the total amount of leads whenever that cost is really good, and whenever the cost is too expensive, scale it down a bit. So I think this is a great demonstration of how these scaling rules can be applied. And again, you can see like over here, we have 13 leads generated that day, 7 leads being generated that day. Total leads for this ad set were 305 during this 2-3 month period. So had we deactivated that ad set way back here when it first started to perform poorly, we might have missed out on 150 leads in total that were generated. But because of the scaling rules, it sustained that performance over a longer period of time and allowed us to extract more value from this ad set. And this is just one ad set of many ad sets in this account. So imagine having to go in and manually adjust that daily budget every single day. You'd have to look at each ad set over the last 7-day period. Is it meeting that criteria? Do I scale it up? How much do I scale it up by? So it's a lot of brain power and kind of meticulous optimization when you have to do it manually. So the scaling rules make it really easy. You don't even have to think about it. If that was helpful, I'd appreciate if you like this video and consider subscribing for more content and marketing tutorials like this in the future. I'll see you in the next video.